I'm talking with these companies that are AI native or looking for AI experts. I need to prove why I'm that AI person. And I'm like, oh shoot, well, I haven't built an AI company from scratch. What stories am I going to tell? Should I explain that I have a patent because that shows that I'm an innovator? The reality is like the way that you're going to come across most naturally as, is this person really a right fit, is being able to show your thought process on the ground. The most successful conversations that I had were when I wasn't trying to explain myself or brand myself in some way. It was, hey, thinking about the problem that you as a company are working through, and based on my own curiosity and research that I've been doing in relevant AI technology, this is how I'm thinking you might be approaching that. This is how I would be curious to approach that. Is that how you approach that? Like, where is my thinking going wrong?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikhil Singhal. I'm your host for the Skip podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you advance in your tech career. Boy, advancing your tech career is complicated these days, and no more so than for those of you trying to look for a job, particularly an AI first job or an AI first company role. And what I have found is the best source of information often comes from people not about to embark in a job search, but actually from people who just recently made a decision to join a company and have actually joined. Listening to their postmortem, shall we call it, is really informative. And so as part of Skip Coach, which is a group that all of you listening to this can apply to, we had a conversation with 3 leaders who had recently joined Abridge, Netflix, and OpenAI. And listening to their stories of what has changed, what's new in terms of interviewing, what companies are looking for, what they're not looking for, was really, really informative. I hope you enjoy the conversation that we had. And if you want to be part of future conversations, just go to skip.coach in your browser. Now, we'll take a break, listen to our wonderful sponsors, and get into our conversation. If you spend any time around designers, you probably heard them raving about Framer. I keep hearing it from designers in the Skip community, from friends at startups, from people building side projects. They love it. And here's what's caught my attention. Framer isn't just for designers. It's a website builder that gives non-designers, marketers, founders, product people, the ability to own your own .com without waiting on engineering. You know how it usually goes. Marketing needs a landing page, design mocks it up, and engineering says, we'll get to it. Well, with Framer, that bottleneck disappears. Changes go live in seconds with one click. No engineering required. It's got real-time collaboration, a CMS built for SEO, and integrated A/B testing, and it's enterprise ready. Companies like Perplexity, Miro, and Mixpanel run their sites on it. I'm actually considering moving Skip sites over because honestly, it's beautiful and way less painful to maintain. Learn how you can get more out of your .com from a Framer specialist, or get started building for free today at framer.com/skip for 30% off a Framer Pro annual plan. That's framer.com/skip for 30% off. Rules and restrictions may apply. This episode is brought to you by Dust. Let me ask you something. How much of your team's time is spent on work that truly moves the needle? Not the status updates, the data pulls, the can someone send me that doc messages. I'm talking about the actual real work. Dust is the operating system for AI agents. Agents that know your company as well as you do, maybe better, and then they take action. Your Dust support agent resolves tickets. Your RevOps agent updates your CRM. Your engineering agent reviews PRs and documents code. They work across teams, they talk to each other, and they handle the soul-numbing work so your people can focus on strategy, creativity, and the things that genuinely require a human. Dust connects to everything: Slack, Notion, Google Drive, Salesforce, GitHub, making it highly accurate and relevant. It's model agnostic, so you can switch between Claude, GPT-5, and other models anytime, and it's fully enterprise ready. Dust is how work gets done now and is deployed at companies like Vanta, Clay, Persona, and Assembled. See it in action at dust.tt/skip. That's dust.tt/skip. Welcome, everyone. I am terribly excited to talk to you today about one of the topics that came up in one of the conversations I had in a live event recently. I was talking to some friends and they were like, job searches are really hard, but nobody ever talks about what it's like after you get the job. It's always this super fun, welcome to the new job, but no one ever talks about the difficulties of what it was like to actually go through each and every one of those misses, wins, decisions, and thinking through these transitions. And so I'm joined by Ben, Julia, and Janie, all of whom recently took new roles, exciting new roles actually, and went through this transition. And they're all part of the Skip group. And we would love to share kind of their stories, their learnings, and also take questions from you. For those of you that happen to be joining us live today, we have a Substack going, and it's an opportunity for us to, hear from people live around the questions they have as they're contemplating job transitions. And as we've talked about for the last 6 months, boy, the job market's really dicey and tricky and complicated and sort of quote unquote fun to navigate. And so I'm really excited about today's episode. So welcome everyone. Maybe Ben, I'll start with you. Maybe a quick introduction on kind of where you were, where you're headed, how long you've been in your new company, and how long did it take?
So hey everybody, I'm Ben Dreier. Most recently, I was working at DoorDash. I was there for about a year and a half helping build the new verticals business, so things like grocery and retail. And then about 3 months ago, I moved over to Netflix. And at Netflix, I'm leading our product organization focused on promotional assets and creative technology. What that means is everything about how we actually promote the content on Netflix. Think trailers, artwork, synopses, the things that you see personalized to you on the platform, or marketing that content off platform. There's a huge engine that goes into doing that content justice. And we're building exciting technology to make it happen.
How long did it take you to make this sort of transition from one to the other company? Was it something that was a long transition? Was it something that kind of happened on the side?
It was. I would say it was a long, and I call it like a half passive, half active effort. So I didn't leave my prior job before looking for a new role. I knew that there was something out there that I was yearning for that was going to push my growth, kind of push my evolution in the evolving AI landscape that I wasn't quite getting out of my prior role. And so even though it was an exciting role, I felt like I was able to have impact. I was looking for what that next move was that was really going to propel the next phase in my career. So it was a long journey to ultimately find the role that felt worth jumping to. And I'm pretty excited about where I landed.
So yeah, I'm going to call you AI hungry. I'm going to call you hey, I just felt like I was AI hungry. I really felt like that was the driver for me making a move. Is that a fair characterization?
That's right. And the way I put it is there's no right environment for you have to be at X company or on Y team to be learning about AI. It's personally, I needed to find the right place that I was going to feel motivated and had the right support and momentum to do the sort of AI learning and growth that I personally wanted to do.
I see. That's great. Julia, welcome. I'd love to hear the same. Where were you and what were you thinking, in terms of how long were you at the previous role and then, what led you to sort of transition and how did it go?
So hi, everyone. I'm Julia. My most recent role, I was at Pinterest for about 9 years on the product team leading the growth organization. I think 4 or 5 months ago, joined OpenAI to focus on retention as an IC. And so it was a pretty big transition. I would say my job search overall spanned over the course of a year, although it was not active the full time. So I looked for a couple months while I was still at Pinterest. I knew I was ready to leave. My own learning and growth had kind of felt like it hit a cap. Looked for a couple months, didn't really have a clear sense of what I wanted. And so I ended up looking at roles that were pretty similar to what I was doing at Pinterest, just in a different context. It took sort of getting offers to realize that's not necessarily what I wanted. And so I decided to quit and do some soul searching. So I took sort of 6 months off, took a couple months doing really, really nothing, and then maybe 3 months of active looking before I landed the role at OpenAI. So a year in total, but yeah, not fully looking the whole time.
This is a different archetype than Ben in the sense that you had a long tenure at a company, and then you decided not only to search for a new role, but you actually took time without, a job search, actively. And, there's always this anxiety that people have, both when they're not being paid, as well as like, what if I can't get a job? And what about the optics of me, like, quote unquote, not working, And so the kind of then model of looking a little bit on the side, making a decision, and then moving relatively quickly is sort of the let's call it the default or the norm. What went through your head around like feeling like you were willing to sort of take that time off and reset when the market was moving as quickly as it was?
I think there were two parts to this for me. So my version of looking on the side, I sort of ended up thinking of that as me like testing the market, like are people buying what I'm selling, and got enough interest that I felt confident that like, okay, I can get a job if I need a job. But I also realized I'd been at Pinterest so long, I just needed the space to really think deeply about what I wanted next. Like the roles that I was going for when I was more passively looking just weren't sitting right. And I realized I just didn't have enough space to realize like I definitely wanted to go back to being an IC. I really wanted to be in a building role with a AI focused product to be able to learn that new set of skills and that kind of thing. And I just didn't have that clarity when I was grinding in a current role. So
Related to that, I just want to build on this point around, hey, I felt like I wanted to, do something different. Did you use that time off, to sort of quote unquote upgrade your skills, whether that was a Reforge class or building a, website on the side using Claude Code? I mean, a lot of folks are like, look, I don't have time to upgrade my skill, but yet my skill needs to be slightly different because I want a job that's slightly different. So I'm going to use the hiatus, not necessarily to travel and rest, but really to sort of go through that personal boot camp, let's call it. Did that enter your mind? Was that some opportunity that was available to you? How did you think about retraining or upgrading or rethinking some of the skills?
yeah, I kind of wish I said I would do a personal boot camp, but I did not. I was definitely I was gardening in the afternoon and going to Target when no one else was there. So yeah, I did not do that personally. I felt like, for me at least, it was more of the self-discovery to figure out like what I wanted, what that would look like in a job, and then kind of giving myself permission to go after it versus a rebuilding of skills.
Yeah, and obviously you went from Pinterest to OpenAI, and so it wasn't quote unquote necessary for you to demonstrate a skill that that was sort of absent from yourself. But I think that's always interesting to understand, like what are the different ways people spend their time and what worked and what didn't. Janie, welcome. I'd love to hear your story around transition and where you were, and then how long you took to kind of get to the next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janie Lee. I'm the VP of Product at Abridge. We're building the clinical intelligence layer in healthcare, including in the patient-clinician conversation. I've been here for just under 6 months now. And prior to Abridge, I spent about 4.5 years at Loom, which was an async video product. The first 2.5 years, it was very much a PLG, fast-growing company. The last 2 years, we were acquired by Atlassian, and so loved my time there. Every 6 months felt like being at a different company, and really, really loved all the growth that I was able to see. I think towards the end, I really had the itch to go somewhere that was just completely AI native. I think I was lucky in my previous role that we were shipping a lot with AI, but I was probably spending 40% of my time thinking about offense, but being a pre-AI company, I was spending 60% of my time also thinking about defense, whether it's cannibalizing the business, and I think very, very much stuck in where a lot of the pre-AI companies are. And so I spent about, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks once I fully decided I was ready for something new, just going completely deep and figuring out where would I want to be and going through and putting in as much effort as I could. I did do it while I was still at my previous role, but I think the effort and focus came over weekends, evenings, and was able to thankfully make it work.
You're at one of the most interesting companies out there as a head of product. It's obviously one of these AI growth stars. For those of you that don't know about Abridge, it's one of those companies that just continues to grow, fueled largely by the growth in, AI technology, and it has a ton of domain expertise inside the building. And I think that the process that you use, Janie, the framework of saying, look, I'm in a company that's growing, that's doing well. I've had a reasonable tenure, both in late stage at Atlassian and obviously in growth stage, which was Loom prior to the acquisition. And I think what you focused on, and to some extent, Ben, what you also articulated is a pretty focused search around AI native or AI leaning kind of opportunities. Ben, of course, you ended up at Netflix, which people wouldn't say is naturally the sort of AI startup. Janie, you are absolutely at one of the hottest companies out there. And so, Janie, in your case, when you said, I think I want to go AI native, what was the process you used that you mentioned over that 6 to 8 weeks to sort of identify those companies and start like triangulating towards the right ones to even talk to? I think that's always the challenge. Did you go to venture websites? Did you talk to friends? How did you make your quote unquote list?
Yeah, it's a good question. I spent probably just a full week and a half having, if I had to guess, 50 or 60 conversations just to figure out what is my list of top 5 to 10 companies I just want to go all in on. And I'm very much I need a small set of things to focus on. And so it was a really helpful process for me. And there's obviously the set of AI labs, and where I spent a lot of time exploring also was across all of the applied AI companies, which ones were the ones I wanted to spend time on. And I think for a lot of these jobs, they frequently aren't posted online, which means you need to have a lot of conversations. It was everyone from, I pulled out everyone in my Rolodex. It was every VC I knew. I asked, what are the best companies or more interesting companies that are top of mind for you? I talked to friends who were at those companies to see what other companies they were exploring in their job search, and also previous mentors. And I think in those conversations, there was a set of companies that rose to the top and came up frequently, and that started to give me the beginnings of the list. And from there would do a lot of my own research on listening to the founders of those companies and speak about where they were going and getting to my own hypothesis of, is this a really strong applied AI company that I think, one, has some form of defensibility in 6 to 12 months, and two, for whether it's because of the people, the distribution, or whatever reason, I was really, really compelled to learn more about.
Did you stick to that criteria? Like, did you stay with if it's not AI native, and you essentially do a burn down of the broad list and then narrowed it down, or did it end up evolving and expanding and you end up talking to companies that weren't even AI native? Like how true were you to your hypotheses?
I was pretty true. I said, these are the 5 to 10 I'm most excited by. I'm going to give everything I have to these 5 to 10. If it doesn't work, I'll go back to the drawing board and figure out what else I could do. But I think once I spent the week going really, really broad, I really quickly shifted into let's give it a shot and see where it goes.
Ben, you had a similar start in that you really wanted to lean into something that was AI native. How much did what Janie described match your own experience and process that you used?
I used a lot of similar process, especially for understanding earlier stage, like true AI native, where is there the greatest opportunity? And honestly, I use probably the same sort of signals that a lot of people use. Where are the VCs that I tend to respect choosing to put their time and attention and ultimately money? And two, where are people that I've met in my career that I really respect and feel like are constantly on the cutting edge, choosing to spend their time and ultimately committing themselves to? So that's how I navigated the early stage landscape. I was trying to balance that with, okay, what does the AI opportunity look like in late stage world? And the big thing for me that I was searching for was, where does it feel like the approach to AI in a company isn't just, oh, everybody seems to be doing this thing, we should all look out for opportunities to layer it on top. It's, where is there such a clear strategic business rationale for why it's crucial for us to invest in AI transformation? And so it was a very different sort of question that I was looking to answer when I was talking with later stage companies. And the only way to really get that is by talking to people. So to Janie's point, like, I wasn't going to job sites and just looking for where the job description sounded interesting. I was finding anybody at Microsoft, anybody at Netflix, anybody at some of these later stage companies, and just trying to understand from them, how is leadership thinking about business strategy? where are you seeing celebration of investments in AI and like the sort of use cases that this company really cares about applying it to? And that was the way that I kind of navigated my way into finding where are the pockets where they are truly motivated for the right reasons to make meaningful investments into the AI landscape.
I think that both of you are describing a very thoughtful, very network heavy, very coffee chat type process instead of, starting on LinkedIn and hitting apply now and hoping you get the call back. You're describing look, in the next handful of months, I want to enter market. As such, I want to make sure I'm being thoughtful around who I'm talking to. Even before I interview, I want to have an understanding of how the company's approaching it, what the company's like, what the growth trajectory. So I'm going to leverage my network, the investors, et cetera. I think that many people that are listening to this might say, that's great for, sort of the Silicon Valley elite. But, I don't necessarily have that network. I don't have the 50 people that I could pick up the phone and talk to. I don't have a former coworker at Netflix. I don't have someone who is an investor that I know at these top tier firms. How did you end up opening those doors? And perhaps the question maybe more broadly is, what advice do we have if you're currently working and, wanting to eventually get to a new role? What do I do to cultivate those relationships in an authentic process that allows me to have those doors available to me when I do enter market? Maybe I'll start with Janie, because you described the 50 coffee meetings, and then maybe I'll get Bennett and move to Julia on this one. This is a good one.
I think there's no harm in reaching out to people who are already there, but I think you need to figure out what is your wedge in or what is the reason someone would speak to you. And I probably get 50 messages in any given week for people wanting to reach out. And I'd say the range of content coming in looks very, very different. I've had folks reach out to me cold, having created an entire prototype with an idea they have about the product that we're building. That's going to compel me to look at the message for more than 5 seconds. And if I learn something new, I will take a call. And so I think there's a way to catch the attention of someone. And if you think that 50 or 100 people also have the same email address as you, I think you have to send the email with the question of why would someone respond to me in a sea of 50 to 100 emails? And I think the beauty is we have so many tools at our fingertips to put in effort and create something that is really compelling for the recipient. And so I think if you think about, one, you should do the cold outreach. There's very, very little to lose. I'd say that I wouldn't even call it step 1, that's step 0. And so don't ever just apply. You should always do the cold outreach. And then second, when you are doing the cold outreach, give people a reason to respond that looks different from 49 other people who might be doing the same thing.
And how many of your conversations that you had were kind of cold versus relationships that you had, had and cultivated over the time?
In my most recent search, I think transparently, probably less than 10%. I think where it was cold, it was still through a warm intro, but I always made the ask of someone. And so I'd say that's the other bit is if you have a secondary connection, it also helps a lot to have someone send the intro. It's definitely still warm, but I think as you think about the rules in the companies, look for who your second connections are and ask for the intro.
Yeah, and Ben, how did you build that, kind of relationship network so that it was available to you when the time came?
I couldn't agree more with Janie. Now I feel very lucky that I spent years working at companies that now have broad networks. And so I have some more natural connections to be able to tap into, especially second and third degree. Especially earlier on in my career, I was cold calling the heck out of people. And what I found, a different style is going to work for everybody. For me, I'm not a natural networker. It doesn't feel comfortable to me to reach out for a reason. But the thing that guides me is curiosity. I'm an incredibly naturally curious person. And the thing that feels most genuine to me is reaching out to have a conversation with somebody, not because I'm looking for a connection or I'm looking for an in somewhere, but I'm legitimately interested to learn more about the way they're thinking about something and the way that they're approaching something. And so I found that the personal style that worked best for me was doing the cold emails, accepting the fact that maybe I'm going to hear back from 10% of them, but the 10% that reach out resonated with the why behind why I really wanted to talk with them, not just somebody at the company that they worked at. And that honestly, that's what got me my first real job in product. And I think that's continued to be how I've built kind of an organic network over the years.
Julia, you've been listening to sort of the process and the pipeline that these two built, heavily network-based, very, very focused on AI-centric companies. You had mentioned your interest was to be moving a little bit from a indirect kind of a leadership role into a hands-on role. And you also had a deliberate search going. What was your process like? How did you build your quote unquote pipeline and how much did it change as you went through your journey?
Yeah, I think mine was definitely a little bit different than Ben and Janie. So when I was looking while I was still at Pinterest, it's a much trickier situation because you want to sort of be mindful of who you're telling that you're looking. And so I was doing much more of the sort of cold apply, talking to sort of trusted people outside the company to get leads on what was out there. Once I decided to leave, it became a lot easier to, tell people that I was looking, and I started getting a lot more inbound, I would say, of just opportunities that are out there that people might have thought of me for. One thing that was different, I think also than the stories we've heard so far is I found a lot of value from exec recruiters or sort of specialized recruiters. And I got connected with some of them. A lot of you probably have messages in your LinkedIn DMs from exec recruiters or recruiters over the years. And so I sort of went back through those messages to find, maybe someone had messaged me a year ago and now they're at a new spot, and kind of responding and using that as like a warmer intro. And then just taking a bunch of calls. So the exec recruiters are really great at sort of understanding what I was looking for and trying to do that matching to opportunities that I wouldn't have thought about, wouldn't have known about because they weren't posted, or just like companies that weren't on my radar. So the network was a big part of it, but I also ended up with offers from places I had cold applied to or had gotten connected to from a sort of side recruiter.
And were the recruiter conversations useful to open up like, oh, I know there's this company that's hiring that might be great for you? Or were they useful to sort of figure out like, oh, this is how the market might see you, Julia. This is the level, the seniority, the skills. This is our suggestion as to which type of company to go after or avoid. How much of this sort of guidance came from the recruiters, or as you ended up deciding where to go, where did the guidance come from more broadly?
I think the guidance from recruiters on the market was interesting. It probably wasn't a game-changing element for me. I just found it interesting of what kind of roles are out there, what they were seeing. It's really nice when there's a recruiter too that's not at the company. It's very much easier to see them on your team than on the company's team. Their job is to just find, the best person, but they also want to be able to place you for other roles if it's not going to work. So they have a sort of more we were playing for the same side than it is when you're just speaking directly with the company. In terms of ultimately making a decision, if that's what you're asking about for guidance, it was a lot of sort of talking to trusted mentors, people who knew me really well, and then really digging deep at OpenAI, sort of once I had an offer to do some due diligence on is this going to be a good fit for me? I'm someone who I tend to get the role and then do litigate if I want it versus doing a lot of the litigation up front before I start the process.
Now, for the three of you, did you end up looking at one or two offers and interviewing at a very small number of companies? Or did you end up going through a much broader pipeline? I'm kind of looking for what was the width of your pipeline? I think people all the time have different approaches, such as the spray and pray model versus the very targeted rifle shot model. Julia, in your case, did you end up being pretty narrow, or did you go really broad in terms of the companies you talked to?
Probably somewhere in between. I definitely wasn't I need to work at an AI lab. I'm only talking to these couple companies. I was mostly looking for, so when I look at any role, I'm most interested in the people, are the people there good? The product itself, it's do I like the product, use the product, or can I at least understand, I need to understand the motivation behind the product. And then just the personal growth opportunities, is this going to give me an opportunity to really be in a builder role again? And that could show up for me in a lot of different ways. So I was looking, somewhat broadly, not a full anything goes, but within that set of criteria, I was flexible on sort of how that manifested.
And ultimately, when, there's a question around where did the job come from at the end of the day, in the OpenAI case, did you just apply through the front door, or were there folks that you knew through your previous network, or was that a venture introduction? Like, how did you open that door, I guess is the question.
So I had cold applied to a role in my first, while I was still at Pinterest. They had reached out to me about an interview. I ended up being sick, and so I had to cancel, and then I just fell off my radar. And then they reached back out to me about this role, I guess it was maybe 8 months later. I think right once you sort of apply, you're just in their system. So it wasn't like a referral or sort of a network-based. I still think of it as somewhat of a cold apply in that sense.
So in some ways, you were passive, but you were reached out because of your work at Pinterest when you were there. Ben, in your case, curious around the width of your pipeline, how broad did you go? And then ultimately, when it comes to Netflix, where did that introduction ultimately come from?
Yeah, so I think my approach tends to be, I almost have the opposite mindset from Julia maybe, which is I need to be so confident that I'm really excited about a role to be able to engage myself in the interview process. So I did a ton of upfront dating, is what I'll call it. I took first, second, and third calls trying to really understand a company and assess the fit of the company overall, and then figure out if there was an interesting role. I did very, very little actual interviewing. By the time I got to the interview phase, I'm trying to even remember if I technically interviewed at a second company this time around, or if Netflix was the only place that I truly interviewed. But I like having that motivation that I really care about a role to be able to then put my best foot forward and really give it my all in the interview process to secure the role. And you asked, where did this role come from? Nikhil, there's maybe where you think this one came from, and then there's an original backstory here. So this time around, I did happen to know somebody at Netflix in this organization that I ended up joining. And so that's where the conversation started 6 months ago about the role that I ended up taking. The reason I knew that person originally was because I cold applied to Netflix 7 years ago. And I almost joined Netflix. Primary reason being, I was so enthralled with the team, impressed by the culture and the people, and particularly the hiring manager at that time. And the hiring manager 6 years ago, agreed to keep in touch with me and serve as a de facto mentor over time, even though I ultimately decided not to join the team back then. And so all of this really traces back to a cold application on the Netflix website 6 or 7 years ago.
That's great. That's really interesting. And I love both of these points for a second. I wanted to stay on it. I think, because I'm always interested in what you do today influences what may happen tomorrow. That's why the whole property that we work on is called Skip, because it's very much like careers are long-term and job searches are also long-term. Janie described, look, when I became time to it, only 10% of the people I talked to of the 40 or 50 are people that were new. Most of them were soft relationships and encounters that I had had. So I'd built that level of trust, and I'd been on the receiving side of that as people were asking me questions as well. And that was the time. Julia mentioned that, because of the role that I had, there were reach outs that were coming in through the LinkedIns, et cetera. And I was able to respond. And even at the moment it didn't work out, it was actually important. And Ben took it to the next level and said, look, 7, 8 years later, I still end up engaging in some conversation that happened in the past. So I think that all of this describes look, what we work on now has sort of an impact in the future, even if it doesn't seem timely or transactional or valuable in the moment. Building this network, creating this kind of connection and maintaining these relationships ultimately brings a lot of luck. At the highest level, we could say, oh yeah, this was just a lucky thing that worked out, but this luck was highly, highly engineered. Now, and Janie, in your case, similarly, when we talk about the breadth of the pipeline, and then ultimately, where did Abridge come from? Was it a relationship that either reached out directly to you or you held in the past, or was it something that you literally kind of opened the door on or used a recruiter? How did that go through?
Similar to Julia, one of the calls I had was with an exec search firm and a recruiter that I had known over the years. And it just happened to line up with the sets of companies I was really interested in. And I think there's a piece to your point of luck that the timing worked out. when I originally created that list of 10 companies, 5 of those probably weren't really valid companies because they weren't hiring or there wasn't necessarily a role fit. And so it was a lot of serendipity.
Do you, maybe not just for you, but all three of you, do you maintain relationships with recruiters even as employed people? Like you mentioned that there's a recruiter that you knew. Are you only talking to recruiters or venture folks while you're in transition, or are you constantly, having those discussions?
I'm constant, but probably not from the angle that you would think. I think mostly as a person who's hiring, I frequently continue to stay in touch about the roles I'm now hiring for to see if there are folks in their network or in their conversations who are looking for new roles. I think they tend to draw in a lot of really, really high density talent and folks who are actively looking who we may just not know about. And so I found it helpful to also share in the other direction the opportunities that I'd love to get on their radar.
Ben, what about you? Who are you staying in touch with?
I'd say similarly, there are just recruiters that I've ended up building relationships with over time that I naturally end up checking back in with every couple of years. But I'm not constantly grabbing coffee or reaching out to say, what are you seeing in the market? It's just not my style. It's not like how I've cultivated the relationships.
Got it. And Julia, do you have like these authentic relationships that you maintain, or is this just one thing too many for you to manage?
I think it's maybe more similar to Ben. It's not a constant thing. I've had enough friends that are recruiters over the years that whenever time permits, I try to respond to these, like when recruiters cold outreach me on LinkedIn, like I will do a pass like every couple months and just go through and say like, thanks for thinking of me, not interested right now. And I actually think that has had some value just because they don't hear back from so many people in general that they appreciate just even the like not looking type response. So I keep sort of a very passive, touch back and forth with people, but sort of ends up being a large volume of people.
And, Ben, you mentioned this story that I want to go back to, which is, there was a relationship that you had even as you interviewed with Netflix, but it was years prior. You were impressed, the manager and you kind of maintained some type of connection. I'm curious, do you or others do the same thing? Like, do you maintain connections with your past coworkers, or even in the extreme case, people that you've interviewed that didn't work out that you were excited about? Is that a natural thing that any of you do?
Yes, and I only do it when it feels natural, is kind of the point to me. Like I'm embarrassed to ask people to mentor me if it doesn't feel like a natural fit that, gosh, I respect and enjoy talking with this person so much that I really want them on my, personal board of directors. Similarly, I've interviewed people over the years that whether it was the right fit and I extended an offer and they didn't accept, or maybe it wasn't even the right fit in that role and we didn't extend an offer, there are people that I just so clearly clicked with, respected their approach to product and like who they were as a person, that I asked if they would be willing to stay connected. And, it doesn't mean that we're grabbing coffee once a week. Some of these people I check in with maybe every 6 months, every 12 months. I want to be an open line for them if they're looking for advice or want a sounding board for things. But yeah, I've maintained a lot of relationships that kind of just happened through a random interview process over the years.
Yeah, I love that point. And part of the reason I'm making this and staying on this point for a few extra minutes is I really feel that a lot of the story that you folks mentioned wasn't a typical sales pipeline. It wasn't like, look, in order for me to get a job, I need to talk to 100 companies. And so if I apply to 100 and I'll get through process at maybe 10 and maybe 5 are things that I'm willing to do, then I'll go through it. And boy, that's going to take a bunch of time. So I'll have to quit. Instead, it was like this careful cultivation and then a very very targeted search that made sense. And so when you're cultivating those conversations, it has a lot to do with those relationships that you've built over the years or in your current employer or how you think about past relationships, mentors, et cetera. Skip as a community where you folks are members, it's over 100 people, but in the initial stages, there were a few dozen. almost everyone that were in the few dozen were people that had interviewed at one of my previous jobs and actually had chosen not to take the job, which is sort of a hilarious start to the group. Because I was very excited because the company was in hypergrowth. So we were able to recruit and talk to some of the best in Silicon Valley. And they would come and they would interview, but for a variety of reasons, it may not have worked out. But the ones that really caught my eye, kind of the reverse situation, what you described, Ben, are the ones that I stayed in touch with. Because I said, look, though it didn't work out here, and though you chose someplace else that made sense, and so you rejected us, I would love to be able to sort of stay on your journey, see where you went and see if we can be helpful or I can be helpful, not for the purposes of trying to somehow hope that they fail in their next role and they come back. It was much more of a genuine understanding, like, look, they were strong enough for us to give them an offer. Those are folks that over time, I'd like to be part of their orbit, either to help them and perhaps they may help me, and I would like to learn from them. And so I just feel like there's so many opportunities in our current workplace or in our current neighborhood or in our current social circles or even through, podcasters and other, there's so many opportunities to build those relationships that will help you when you need it. But that is sort of genuine networking. And I love the fact that that was such a core part of the search that you folks did. I'm going to transition for a second over to interviewing because I think that, a good chunk of questions that are coming in, are based on, what worked, what didn't, what was a surprise, et cetera. So maybe I'll throw this up for grabs, but maybe I'll start by saying, like, when you went through this interview process, you all had a perception of what the process would look like, and then you ended up seeing what it ended up being. And obviously, you've talked to a lot of people that were going through process at the same time. So maybe you can identify what was kind of the most surprising parts of it, or perhaps the most notable as you think through guidance for others that are maybe preparing for an interview. Julia, maybe I'll start with you, particularly because you went through the OpenAI process. It's a process that a lot of people are contemplating. Any surprises or any gotchas or any tips and techniques and things that you want to make sure people are thinking through?
So I think with the OpenAI process, there are parts of it that look very similar to what you would expect with other product processes and other parts that are maybe a little different. So they have the typical slate of sort of PM fundamental interviews, product sense, product execution, et cetera. You should expect them to be, AI focused versus design a alarm clock for the blind. Like, they're going to be a little bit more specific. One thing that was very different, though, that I ended up enjoying a lot was that the cross-functional interviews and the later loops were almost all also sort of case study live working sessions. So instead of the behavioral, tell me about a time when, it was like, here's a problem we're working on, just like, how would you start? And it was either things that they had done very recently or were actually thinking about. And that was great for me because it broke me out of the sort of typical interview mindset. You got to see what it would be like to actually work with this person on the other side, which was really useful information for me. And I think I got to show up in just a much more of like my natural habitat than this like contrived story about something I did in the past. So I found their process to be much more focused on demonstrating what you can do today versus just like regurgitating what you've done in the past.
Well, we'll come back to that, but what I'm hearing from you is the storytelling aspect that a lot of us prepare for. What did you do in the past? What problems did you solve, et cetera, perhaps were less relevant than you being thrown into kind of almost like a problem solving or working session. And so it was less about, how did this work at, in your case, Pinterest, and more about, imagine if you were struggling with this, what questions would you ask, et cetera. Is that a fair way of understanding? It's like sort of what you felt played out at OpenAI?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that the set of behavioral questions I got are things about my past. I interpreted as being demonstrated at making sure that I was someone who had been in the weeds enough in my past role and that I was going to be okay as an IC, like that I really wanted to be an IC and could show that I had operated at least with some of that mindset historically. But yeah, most 90+% of it is sort of live problem solving.
Interesting. So it was less about, give me examples where you were hands-on, and more about, here's the problem, how would you solve? And then they were able to glean, is this person essentially in the weeds or not in the way they answer the question.
I think so. Yeah. So as an example, like the engineering cross-functional interview, right? I was sort of just getting, pushed to go deeper and deeper and deeper on like, specifically what would you build? Like, what's the first experiment? What are the groups? Like, what is the behavior? Just trying to make sure that you could show that depth.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Ben, tell me a little bit about this sort of question around storytelling and, describing the past versus describing, for example, an AI specific skill. A lot of people are asking, how much AI did you have, and then perhaps how hands-on, like walk me through how you thought about preparing and what was the surprise.
It was a hilarious emotional journey is the way that I'll put it. I think I felt this pressure of, oh gosh, I'm talking with these companies that are AI native or looking for AI experts. And so I need to prove why I'm that AI person. And I'm like, oh shoot, well, I haven't built an AI company from scratch. What stories am I going to tell? And I had some early things that I was doing. If I'm like, well, I don't know, I have a patent for work that I did in the past. Like, should I explain that I have a patent because that shows that I'm an innovator? Like, it's this branding exercise that I felt the pressure to go through very early on. And the reality is like to Julia's point, the way that you're going to come across most naturally as, is this person really a right fit, is being able to show your thought process on the ground. And so I found that actually the most successful conversations that I had were when I wasn't trying to explain myself or brand myself in some way. It was, hey, thinking about the problem that you as a company are working through, and based on my own curiosity and research that I've been doing in relevant AI technology, this is how I'm thinking you might be approaching that. This is how I would be curious to approach that. Is that how you approach that? Like, where is my thinking going wrong? And it was really in being able to engage with problems that I felt like teams were able to assess whether I was really going to be the right thought partner for solving them.
Did you end up having like a sort of a longer take home or, an exercise which really kind of showcased that thinking?
I know people have hot opinions about the value of take home, whether it's worth doing take homes. I love a good take home when I'm interviewing because it gives me the opportunity to really be able to deeply engage with these problems. And this was one where, so my experience interviewing with Netflix, I had already had a couple, cross-functional, one-on-one, more behavioral interviews. And I actually got feedback after one of the interviews from the recruiter, which was very generous. They said, you didn't come across as showcasing your AI mindset in how you approach that problem. I'm like, that's fair. It's also because, to be honest, like I didn't really have an AI mindset when I tackled that problem in the past. But so I took it as the gauntlet for, okay, when I get into this homework, I need to be able to demonstrate that I can engage deeply with the AI aspects and an AI first approach to this problem. And that didn't mean that I already had to have all of the experience and paradigms that I could apply on top of it. I took it as a challenge to say, how deep could I go? How much could I really learn about relevant AI technologies that maybe I wouldn't have even considered 2 years ago, that now are the obvious way that I need to approach the problem? And then there's maybe one element that I had thought less about in the past that I tried to apply more now, which is that the technology is evolving so quickly that to say, I understand the tech and how it's going to apply here, so this is the right solution, you're going to be stale 6 months from now. And so instead, I had to actually engage with that as like another dynamic in the problem solving itself, which is, this is what we know about the technology today. This is where it seems like the technology is evolving the most quickly and where I would expect the greatest advances to be. But to be honest, who knows? Like, we don't know where the research is necessarily going and how quickly new capabilities are going to be unlocked. So this is how I would think about setting up a team to actually engage with that evolving technology and the path of, well, what if this problem gets solved for us 6 months from now versus what if nobody has built that technology 6 months from now? So it was a different way of scenario planning and like thinking through what strategic execution means in a world with evolving capabilities.
I think there's such gold in this point, Ben, that I want to make sure that we emphasize, which is the authentic curiosity and the questions and the humility to essentially note that, I don't know, but here's how I would approach it, is a relatively unobvious way to conduct an interview. if you think about it, if I'm going to ask you a series of questions in an interview, you think about SAT preparation. It's either A, B, C, or D. There is no like, I don't know, let's talk about it. But it turns out there's a lot of power in nuance because in reality of the scenario that you're working through, a lot of these questions are unanswerable. A lot of these you don't have enough context to be able to really nail it. And so they want to hear how you think. And when they see that you're open and thinking through and dealing with suggestion and changing it, or that recognize that technology changes and your learning will change, it gives people a sense that, hey, this is the type of person who comes across as a problem solver that would fit in our environment. And that also sort of applies to your note, Julia. I'm curious because you're in the most AI native art company, you could argue, and you went from Pinterest, which is not known to be AI native. You must have had quite a bit of anxiety that, Ben also shared around, hey, how am I going to come across as like AI, expert in this interview? How did you end up what turned out to be the secret sauce? Or did you end up having to brush up or prep on this? Or how did that end up playing out?
When I was going through the OpenAI interview loops, I made sure that I was going much deeper than I would have normally gone on the announcements they were putting out, reading maybe the papers behind the announcements, that kind of stuff to try to build my own inner working knowledge. But one thing I think I found is that, at least on the product side, and I'm still in a growth focused role at OpenAI, but the knowledge that they're missing is not necessarily AI knowledge. I think I had a skill set around growth and doing product in a different way that sort of was able to complement what people inside the building that had been there for a while could already do. And so I didn't get the sense that they were looking for an AI expert, but somebody who, could have the ability to sort of learn and think in sort of new and novel ways, if that makes sense. So it didn't end up being a huge thing. It was much less important, at least at OpenAI, than I had anticipated.
Yeah, also slightly unintuitive. And, I'm curious, Janie, this question would apply very much to you. I mean, you're one of the hottest AI companies out there. You also came from Atlassian and Loop, which wasn't necessarily companies that were known for being AI first. Yet you were targeting these first AI first companies. And so, how did you think about the prep to demonstrate your AI knowledge? And then as you ended up unfolding, not only was it an AI first company, but it was a head of product role. So something that was a fairly substantive leadership position. So you were probably being asked on two fronts, and those were the kind of roles you were hunting as well. So I'm really curious around how you did the prep and what ended up playing out.
On the prep side, I really anchored on the things at previous companies, whether at Loom when we were shipping some of our first AI features, or at Opendoor when I was primarily working with our ML pricing teams on learnings there that extend to how I think about shipping product now. And then I think for just broader prep, similar to Julia, just did a lot of reading to get smarter. And so I do think there is, especially coming from a non-AI native company, a lot of prep that I think helps you be a lot more dangerous. And in the process itself, similar to Ben, I love a take-home or a whiteboarding session. It's also a good signal for me to figure out, am I getting excited about this work? And can I see myself doing this 5 days a week? And in the Abridge process, we had a whiteboard session on something that was very specific to healthcare. And I had no experience with healthcare, but I actually think doing a take-home now in the age of AI is incredibly fun because you can become an expert a lot quicker and also go through a lot more content and depth in a much shorter period of time. And I think that's where I got to showcase how would I actually do the job. And so did deep research across multiple products to learn about this very, very specific use case and topic that we were looking at. And within, an hour or two of reading became deep enough to know what it was when 2 hours ago I didn't know what the whiteboarding topic was about. And then got really curious. I couldn't find an existing version of the product online, so I scoured through YouTube videos of the founder speaking, found a sample of the product, and started creating mocks and prototypes of what this would look like. And then started thinking, like, as if I were a PM at the company, what would it take to ship this thing? How would I actually commercialize or monetize it? And probably over the course of a weekend, went through the whole idea to commercializing plan, created a prototype, and I think got really, really deep in what that would look like. And in an AI first world, you have to inevitably answer things like, what would it take to ship this thing? What do evals actually look like? And if you just force yourself to go through the end-to-end process of shipping a product at the company you're looking to be at, I think you inherently both have to learn yourself a lot about the company, but also about all of the AI considerations you might not have in your old job. But you also have an opportunity to show your ability to learn and think in the context of already being there. And I'd encourage everyone who is going through a process with a take home to go very, very deep. If, when I think my recruiting partner told me I was in over 120 interviews in Q4. When I think about what I've seen in some of the patterns, I feel like prototypes are the standard now in any take home, but the lens I look at it with is this a prototype I could have created myself in 30 minutes? Or is this someone who's thought really deeply and has gone above and beyond that showcases that they can think about what it actually means to ship at Abridge? And so I think, especially as tools are getting better, it seems like weekly, are you taking advantage of them, and are you going really, really deep and taking on the mindset of a PM who's already here?
There's a balance between showing acumen in real time and being able to apply oneself to a problem at the company and pedigree and brand. And what the three of you are essentially saying is the pendulum, for a variety of reasons, have relatively significantly shifted towards demonstration of skill problem solving and less about where you've been, what you've done, what title you've held in the past. That is a highly optimistic point for those that perhaps have not had the opportunity to work for, these quote unquote brand names. Now, on the flip, the brands help them connect with people, open up opportunities, explore positions, bounce ideas, help shape the pipeline, et cetera. So there's a balance, of course. It's not, people that are completely unknown that are able to open these doors. But that today, if you have the ability to demonstrate with your own hands how you think and how to solve the problem at the company that's in front of you through some research, through some reading, and target a handful of companies that have open roles, you can really stand out in process. That's what I'm hearing. I would love, as we kind of wrap up here, maybe each of you to give kind of a single takeaway as to what piece of advice do you have for our group listening to this, contemplating a search, perhaps now actively or perhaps in the coming months of 2026. What advice do you have that you wish you perhaps had when you were going through your own cert, in this past year? What anything come to mind that you want to that we haven't covered so far?
I mean, I think for me, what ended up being the key to my job search and landing in a role that I felt really good about was the sort of soul searching piece about what I wanted and being okay with where that landed, even though it was different. I think a lot of people think of, I had a big team at Pinterest, so moving from a director role with a big team to an IC role is like a step back. And I ended up really not thinking about it that way. An IC role is just a very different type of role than I had before. The sort of, constraints of my life at the time were different than I had before. And so I think just getting comfortable with what it is that you want up front would have probably saved me a lot of time from that initial search I did that was a little bit more undirected when I wasn't really clear with myself about what I actually wanted or needed for this stage of career in life. So if you have the space to do that up front, I think it'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of courage in your story, Julia. Courage to sort of perhaps take a role that in the past was something that you held. Courage to take some time off, even though there wasn't a clear kind of clarity on what was next. I love your journey, Ben.
Yeah, I think that maybe echoing similar sentiments to what Janie was mentioning. To me, especially this phase in my career, I'm realizing has to be anchored in following the fun and following the genuine curiosity. And it's so easy in this moment, looking at the job landscape, to try to look for where is the prestige? Where do people seem to say that you can learn the most? But at least personally, the motivation is going to come from being so genuinely interested in the problem to be solved that it feels natural that you're going to learn something there. And I think that's something that maybe I knew in the back of my mind going into the process, and ultimately was like the single greatest decision-making factor when it came down to really choosing a job.
And Janie, as we close out here, you're obviously growing your team, so you're in hiring mode. You're on the opposite side of the table now. As you think about advising people that come to you, what counsel do you have now that you've gone through this journey?
Yeah, I recognize it's a very, very noisy and busy market. And I think in a world that feels so noisy, I'd say, the moments where I'm so impressed or so thrilled to talk to candidates is the high agency, high effort. Has this person put themselves in the shoes of someone who's already here? And have they shown and demonstrated real excitement, curiosity about what it would be to build a product here? And so I think for folks who have the sets of companies that they are potentially curious about or excited by, I'd really encourage the depth. And it's become, I think, easier than ever and probably more fun than ever to actually do those things in a way that I think allows you to get a lot closer to learning about the product and building it before you even get in. And so would really encourage folks to use the tools at pretty much all of our fingertips right now.
Well, Ben, Janie, Julia, thank you so much for sharing your stories and for being available for our community and our group here. I'll share out a recording of this for those of you that didn't get a chance to watch it, and look forward to our conversation next month. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.